I've known Elon for over 20, 25 years, one of America's great entrepreneurs and innovators. But this is not the person I knew even 2 years ago. And I, with respect to Elon, I just don't have the confidence that there's other things that he's not up to behind the scenes, not just, again, what he's expressing quite publicly. And I'm very concerned about a country where people like Elon Musk, others that are sucking up to Donald Trump, that will undoubtedly be carved out of regulations, undoubtedly get massive, even larger federal contracts. I mean, it is an American oligarchy that can be formed here. It's, again, very, very serious.
It's not just a lighthearted bromance or friendship between billionaires. The strategic partnership between Donald Trump and Elon Musk could have severe consequences for American democracy. The richest man in the world has put his support behind the twice impeached, many times indicted, disgraced ex-president, raising millions of dollars for Trump's presidential campaign through his super PAC, spreading dangerous conspiracies through the social media platform he owns. And in turn, Trump has promised him the lead role of a government efficiency commission in a future Trump administration should Trump win. It's an arrangement that raises a lot of questions as Musk's deals and conflicts with the U.S. government run deep. The New York Times today reports on those connections. Quote, Mr. Musk's rocket company, SpaceX, effectively dictates NASA's rocket launch schedule. The Defense Department relies on him to get most of its satellites to orbit. His companies were promised $3 billion across nearly 100 different contracts last year with 17 federal agencies. His entanglements with federal regulators are also numerous and adversarial. His companies have been targeted in at least 20 recent investigations or reviews, including over the safety of his Tesla cars and the environmental damage caused by his rockets. This weekend, he added another complication, shall we say, to the mix. While campaigning for the ex-president in Pennsylvania, Musk may have committed voter fraud in plain sight.
So every day between now and the election, we'll be awarding $1 million, starting tonight. So tonight's person is John Dreyer. The only thing we ask for the $1 million is that you be a spokesperson for the petition, and that's it, really.
So, again, all on camera, right? But what you saw was Elon Musk offering $1 million a day, not just to anybody, but to a registered voter in a hugely critical swing state. If that sounds fishy, it's because it likely is. UCLA law professor Rick Hasen says Musk is veering into clearly illegal vote buying. The Justice Department is declining to comment on whether it is taking a look at the legality of what Musk is doing. But Trump, who has not shied away from lavishing praise on his billionaire buddy as of late, notably did not have much to say. When asked by reporters yesterday about the lottery, he said, quote, I haven't even followed that. Joining our coverage, Rick Hasen, who we just mentioned, is here. He's a UCLA law professor and NBC News election law analyst. Also joining us, staff writer for The Atlantic, Franklin Foer, whose new piece answers the question, what Elon Musk really wants. Let's deal with that first, Franklin. What does Elon Musk really want?
Well, first of all, he is an egomaniac. He is a very rich man. And I think he's living out a fantasy that many in Silicon Valley have, which is that they have such a high estimation of their prowess, their ability to re-engineer society, their ability to run things better than the rest of us. Here he's got this incredible opportunity to merge his superintelligence with the most powerful apparatus in human history, which is the American state. And of course, there are these really obvious conflicts of interest where he has these huge contracts with the government, which would presumably only get bigger in a Trump administration. There are these regulatory and legal threats against him, which he would be insulated against in a Trump administration. But I think that there is this broader opportunity where Trump has essentially invited him into the government to redesign the government. So you're giving this engineer this opportunity to redesign the government, to make everything more efficient, to do things in his own image, essentially. And that is a hugely worrying thing, because he believes in dismantling large parts of the social safety net, the regulatory state. And also, he's got this incredible grandiose vision for where things could go that he very undemocratically would be able to impose from a position like the one that Trump has proposed handing to him.
Franklin, there's something, we just had the picture up of Elon Musk leaping or cheering, I don't know what verb we're going with for this picture, on the screen. And what I see is the absence of Mike Pence and anyone that served with Donald Trump. I mean, that he's replaced all the people who saw him in the sit room or in the tank with this strange-looking billionaire from the tech world who has no idea what the pain is of living paycheck to paycheck, or having, you know, your kids move back in with you and buying groceries for them and their kids. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump thinks that Elon Musk reinforces something about his political narrative that will help him win is lost on me. Explain the more sort of the spiritual connection between the two, because I don't get it.
I was thinking when you mentioned Mike Pence, remember when we thought he was lickspittle? I mean, I think that he's essentially spending $1 million a day, not just in the name of his abiding love of democracy, but it's on behalf of a very sordid idea of citizenship, where people are essentially enticed to support Trump with financial incentives. This is something the founders would be rolling around in their graves. It's the definition of anti-democratic. But he's not just doing this in order to help Donald Trump win the White House. It's a form of ingratiating himself to Donald Trump even further. This is all just one giant move to suck up to this guy on whom he's already bet everything. Musk has relocated to Pennsylvania. He's essentially funded and invented Trump's get out the vote operation. So, you know, he's essentially saying, look, if you win Donald Trump, everything is then attributed to me. He's amassed the biggest chit any donor could ever imagine building up. And that means that if Trump does get elected, then Musk has every right to expect massive, massive rewards in return.
Only in Trump's America, right? We wouldn't say that about anybody else. Let me deal with the legality. Here's Josh Shapiro on Meet the Press yesterday, Rick.
I think there are real questions with how he is spending money in this race, how the dark money is flowing, not just into Pennsylvania, but apparently now into the pockets of Pennsylvanians. That is deeply concerning. Look, Musk obviously has a right to be able to express his views. He's made it very, very clear that he supports Donald Trump. I don't, obviously we have a difference of opinion. I don't deny him that right. But when you start flowing this kind of money into politics, I think it raises serious questions that folks may want to take a look at.
So, Rick, what are some of those questions that the governor's alluding to?
Well, the federal law is clear that it's against federal law to pay someone to vote or to register to vote. Now, what Musk says he's doing is he's paying people to sign his petition. And he's also letting people enter into this $1 million lottery who signed the petition. But who's eligible to sign the petition? You have to be a registered voter in one of the swing states. So essentially, this is a lottery open only to registered voters. It's either an inducement to get someone to register to vote who's not registered, or it's a reward. And federal law says you can't do that. And so this, to me, unlike some of the earlier things that Musk was doing, this to me seems a clear violation of the federal statute.
Let me read the statute that you have referenced. Whoever knowingly or willfully conspires with another individual for the purpose of encouraging his false registration to vote or illegal voting, or pays or offers to pay or accepts payment either for registration to vote or for voting shall be fined not more than $10,000 or imprisoned not more than 5 years, or both. It feels like Musk is also endangering the voters and the people of Pennsylvania. Would you be surprised if law enforcement looked into this? I mean, does this seem to clearly violate that law?
Well, I think the Department of Justice needs to look into it. And, in order to be criminally liable for any of these election law violations, you have to willfully be violating the law. I don't think someone who signs Musk's petition really understands the intricacies of the law, but coverage of what Musk has tried to do since Saturday night has been extensive in every major news outlet. He's at least on notice that his conduct may be illegal, and yet he's going ahead and doing it anyway. What I would like to see, because the Department of Justice generally moves very slow, is for them to make a statement, just like they made a statement that states shouldn't be engaged in large-scale purges in the period just before the election because that violates federal law. A lottery open only to registered voters, or a lottery for people who vote, is something that is against federal law. They could say that. I'm not sure why they're not.